Sharing a Residence with an Adult Child: A Cause of Psychological Distress in the Elderly, by Carl Pillemer and J. Jill Suter. So in this article, they go straight into talking about how the issue of adult children continuing or returning to live in their parents' home has recently captured academic and media attention due to the increase and growing numbers in that subject. They go on to say how the prevalence of the subject has increased in the past 15 years, which is prompting new research interest. But then they go on to say that despite such interest, empirical investigation of this issue has been very scarce. They say that very little is known regarding the impact of sharing a residence with an adult child. The authors also go on to say how there's been a lot of research that has asserted that residence sharing is likely to pose serious difficulties for the parent. So that there is research out there that shows that the residence sharing between parents and adults poses difficulties for the parents. Other research also shows that in particular, adult children's sharing of the parental home is held to be difficult because there's no norms regulating parent and child relations in these living situations. They say how parents are uncertain as to what their role should be in relation to a resident child, and for this reason, the parent may return to ways of relating to the child that were more appropriate in earlier years. And in turn, the children may also allow themselves to become the needy and dependent child, dependent on their parent child that they used to be before. And that this change in the relationship causes the difficulties within co-residency. They also go on to say that other research has suggested that residence sharing may bring out unwanted changes in the parents' daily lives, such as performing housekeeping tasks for their offspring, arguments between parents and children over the use of space and property, and disagreements over conflicting schedules. They also say how it's also been argued in other research that the presence of an adult child can have a determinal effect on parents' marriages. They also say how other research suggests that sharing a residence with an adult child can have a negative effect on parents' psychological well-being. But then they go on to say that although there is research that studies the psychological well-being of parents during co-residency, it does so with parents who are middle-aged. And they also say that these reports are also based largely on anecdotal evidence rather than more rigorous research. He says that they say that in this study, they seek to shed further light on the issue by examining the effects of residence sharing on parents' psychological well-being using data from a random sample survey of elderly persons in the Boston, Massachusetts metropolitan area. So their focus is going to be on elderly parents. And really quick before I continue, although my specific research won't be focusing on elderly, I decided to include this because the results of this research are very strong and are very useful in my research. And although I'm not focusing mainly on elderly parents still falls under parents. So I think it's okay to include it because I think the results are very useful for my research. Continuing, he says that his research is also aiming to ascertain whether elderly people who share their home with one of their children report higher levels of depression than those who do not share their residence. And now onto the methods. So the data in this article was collected between September 1985 and February 1986 as a part of a largely survey of the family relationship of the elderly. A random sample was drawn of persons 65 years of age and older listed in the 1985 published city and towns list in the Boston area. Research was in this article was conducted through interviews, either telephone or in person. They lasted approximately 30 minutes and covered areas such as social relationship, health, and functional status and family conflict. The in-person interviews were conducted with those who had either hearing difficulties, who didn't have a telephone, or who preferred an in-person interview for any reason. In this research, there was a subsample that was randomly selected from the larger sample for follow-up interviews, in which issues regarding family relations and psychological well-being could be examined in more detail. These follow-up interviews were conducted either by telephone or in person, again depending on the same things that depended in the original, depending on this what depended. I'm sorry. It was either conducted through telephone or in person, and that depended on the same things that it depended on in the study above. And if it was in this present study, they analyzed the data from the follow-up subsample. The analysis is restricted to this group, as the measures of psychological well-being were included only in the follow-up interview. To know about the respondents of the interviews in the study was that 35% of them had completed less than 12 years of education, 41% had completed high school, 10% had completed 1 or 3 years of college, 14% were college graduates, 37% of the respondents were married and living with their spouses, and 45% were widowed, 9% were divorced or separated, and 9% had never married. So this is just different factors that could have affected the results. So now, on to the results. This study found that the relationship between residence sharing and depression. The results in this study found that there was no relationship between residence sharing and depression. They also found that respondents who were in poor health reported greater depression. The study found that gender approached significance, with women reporting higher levels of depression over men, and that age, and it also found that age was not significantly related to depression. The study also found that negative results regarding residence sharing and depression is confirmed in the multiple regression analysis. They found that parents who were sharing their home with an adult child reported no greater depression than those whose adult children lived elsewhere when controlling for age, gender, and self-reported health. So basically, the hypothesis that was made in the beginning of this article, that the negative effects of residency, that there was negative effects of residency, was not supported by this data. He goes into this, discuss his findings and talk about and try to give an explanation for why his results came out the way they were, compared to other researchers who found that co-residency did affect the parents. The findings in the present, he goes on to say how the findings in the present study call into question the assertion that sharing a residence with an adult child has detrimental effects on elderly children. He says that although in this study residence sharing didn't lead to depression, that residence could still be related to levels of stress and anxiety, and that should be further researched. He says that in this study, it cast intergenerational residence sharing in a more positive light than have other previous researchers that have been discussed, and that additional data is required for a fuller understanding of the psychological effects of such living arrangements. So basically, in this study, contrary to other findings and to their original beliefs, they found that co-residency, at least with an adult child and elderly parents, didn't lead or directly correlate to depression, and actually had more positive benefits than negative. But he goes on to say that there's several limitations, and that could have caused these results, and that he definitely thinks that this topic should be further examined and studied and researched by other researchers.